وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا.
Fulfilled dozens of Old Testament prophecies.
Okay, so David Wood claims that Jesus fulfilled dozens of Old Testament prophecies, and he gives two examples, the first one being Isaiah 53. Now, when we read Isaiah 53, it talks about God's servant. So the pertinent question is, who is the servant? Well, if we read other chapters of Isaiah, such as Isaiah 41, verse 8, it clearly identifies who the servant is. Isaiah 41:8 states, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, you, descendants of Abraham, my friend." Who are the descendants of Abraham? The Israelites, the nation of Israel. And then verse 9 again states, "I said, you are my servant." So Israel is the servant. The nation of Israel is the servant, not the Messiah. There are other reasons to doubt that Isaiah 53 is prophesying a crucified Messiah. The main reason is the language used for the servant in Isaiah 53 is consistently used elsewhere for the nation of Israel. And here I'll present a few examples. For more examples, you can see the link in the description from the website IH.com, which is a Jewish website, and it gives a thorough discussion of why Isaiah 53 is not referring to the Messiah. First example, if we go verse by verse, starting with verse 1, "Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" The arm of the Lord is used elsewhere as a phrase referring to the redemption of Israel from persecution. So, for example, see Deuteronomy 26:8, Exodus 3:20, and 6:6, among many other verses. Verse 2, "He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground." This same imagery is used for Israel's struggles in exile, for example, Ezekiel 19:13, which specifically refers to dry ground. Verse 3, "He was despised and rejected by mankind." This is also how Israel is depicted, for example, in Isaiah 49:7. And a really good example is verse 7. "He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent." The same imagery is used in Psalm 44:23 to describe Israel as a sheep for slaughter. Nowhere in the Bible is the Messiah ever described as a lamb being led to the slaughter. In the New Testament, he is described as the lamb, but this is never used as a description of the Messiah, because the Messiah is supposed to be a victorious, militaristic king. So Isaiah 53 is not talking about the Messiah. Scholars such as Bart Ehrman, the bane of Christianity, states in his blog, these passages are not talking about the Messiah. The Messiah is never mentioned in them. Anyone who thinks they are talking about the Messiah has to import the Messiah into the passages because he simply isn't there. I should stress that no one prior to Christianity took these passages to refer to a future Messiah. Isn't that strange? No one before the rise of Christianity read this chapter and said it must be talking about a crucified Messiah.
Miracle of reinterpretation.
So Isaiah 53 is not talking about the Messiah, it is talking about the nation of Israel. The second example that David Wood gave was Psalm 22. Now, when you read Psalm 22, it clearly states that it is a psalm of David. But could it also be a psalm about the Messiah? Since the Messiah is a descendant of David, the answer is perhaps, but with a caveat. Christians claim that Psalm 22:16 is talking about the crucifixion of the Messiah. But the word that is used in Psalm 22:16, the Hebrew word, can mean to bore, to pierce, to dig, or to hew. The better translation of this word is to dig through. And it also can mean a furnace or a pot, which is nothing like what you would expect in a crucifixion. So, can we honestly say that this word is alluding to crucifixion? Clearly not. If the author meant to refer to crucifixion and the nailing of the victim to the cross, a better Hebrew word to use would have been daker, which literally means to pierce, thrust through, pierce through, to strike or thrust through, to wound, to thrust through, to pierce, as with a sword or spear. Wouldn't this have been a better word to use? This could reasonably be used to refer to crucifixion because you're literally thrusting a nail into the victim's body. You're wounding them with a nail. You're piercing them with a nail. Why use another word that has multiple meanings, most of which is to dig, and nobody would dig with a nail? You would thrust a nail. You would drive it through like you would a sword or a spear. This is a much better word to use. But the author chose to use a word that was not as clear. Why? There's also verse 21, which states, "Rescue me from the mouth of the lions, save me from the horns of the wild oxen." Verse 24 states, "He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help." So this is the afflicted person, David, perhaps the Messiah, talking about his prayer to God. He's asking God to rescue him. And then he says that God has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help. Now we know that David was rescued from his enemies. His prayer was answered. So if Psalm 22 is also referring to the Messiah in a typological way, that means the Messiah must also be saved. Remember, this is a Psalm of David. And David was saved. Therefore, the Messiah must also be saved. So if this psalm is referring also to the Messiah, then what it would mean is the Messiah would not be crucified, but actually would be saved. Another interesting verse, verse 11 states, "Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help." Now imagine, if this is referring to a crucified Messiah, why would he say trouble is near? So was Psalm 22 talking about the Messiah in addition to David? If it was talking about the Messiah, it was not talking about a crucified one. This Messiah would be saved from his enemies. And this is the general message of the Bible regarding the Messiah. He is a victorious king, not a crucified king who would return a second time, not a divine king, but a human who is dependent upon God. So when Christians like David would say that Jesus fulfilled dozens of Old Testament prophecies, and they give two examples that are so easily debunked, we know that they are full of hot air.
They argue, like, you know, at one point Camille's like, well, do you accept the fundamentalist argument for that these 300 prophecies in the Old Testament all point to Jesus? No, I don't.
But who in the apologetics community is like making these arguments from prophecy?
Fulfilled dozens of Old Testament prophecies.
I mean, there are a few that make, like, I think there are some decent arguments.
So here you see the prophecy of this Davidic king.
In fact, I think it's my single favorite example of a messianic prophecy. Isaiah 52:13.
There are expected predictions that deals with Old Testament prophecy.
I'm going to pull from a whole bunch of different places in the Bible, and we're going to bring together like a compilation of prophecies that show that Jesus is the deliverer prophesied in the Old Testament.
My argument has always been that they went through the Old Testament and they looked for similarities. Okay, Jesus did this thing that was kind of similar to Moses. We'll just paint it in that picture.